Miranda Hayes had always been the kind of woman who thrived on control. From a young age, she had learned to navigate the chaotic world around her with precision and determination, carving out a path that most would have deemed impossible. She was meticulous, ambitious, and unyielding, a CEO who had transformed a modest startup into a multi-million-dollar corporation within a decade. Her days had once been a series of board meetings, conference calls, and presentations, punctuated by flights to far-off cities, lunches with investors, and late-night brainstorming sessions that blurred into the early hours of the morning. Miranda thrived on the adrenaline of decision-making, the satisfaction of seeing her plans come to fruition, and the constant validation that came from her unparalleled success. But everything changed in an instant. A single moment of misfortune, a slippery road, a sudden swerve, a collision, had stolen from her the mobility she had once taken for granted. The accident left her paralyzed from the waist down, confined to a wheelchair, and forced her to confront a reality she had never imagined. The mirror now reflected someone she barely recognized, a woman who had once been vibrant and unstoppable, now navigating life with limitations that seemed insurmountable. The days that followed the accident were a blur of hospitals, rehabilitation centers, and endless medical appointments. Physical therapy sessions became a routine that sapped her both physically and emotionally. She fought to regain even a semblance of independence, learning how to maneuver her wheelchair, transfer herself in and out of cars, and adapt to spaces that had never been designed for someone like her. The pain wasn't just physical, it was the crushing weight of helplessness, the frustration of relying on others for things she had always done on her own, the constant reminder that life had shifted in ways she could not control. Yet, even in the midst of her struggle, Miranda refused to surrender her identity entirely. She returned to work as soon as possible, determined not to let her accident define her or derail the company she had built. The office became her sanctuary, a place where she could still wield authority, make decisions, and assert her competence. But even there, she felt a subtle shift in the way people treated her. Colleagues, investors, and even friends seemed to view her through a lens of pity, as if her accomplishments were diminished by her condition. Every handshake, every nod of acknowledgement, carried a weight she had never encountered before. She longed for the days when she had been judged solely by her intellect and ambition, not by the limitations of her body. Her personal life had suffered even more. Dating, something that had once been casual and occasionally exciting, had become almost impossible. The thought of inviting someone into her life, someone who would see her vulnerability and struggle, filled her with anxiety. She had long since removed herself from the social scene, retreating into a world of work, therapy, and quiet evenings at her apartment. Friends had drifted away, unable to reconcile the vibrant woman they once knew with the new reality of her body. Family, though supportive, seemed unsure of how to interact with her, hovering on the edges of conversations, afraid to ask the wrong questions. The loneliness was palpable, a constant companion that whispered reminders of everything she had lost, and then, out of nowhere, came the blind date. It wasn't entirely her choice. Colleen, her bubbly and insistent assistant, had taken it upon herself to arrange it. "You deserve some happiness, Miranda," Colleen had said, her eyes sparkling with an optimism that bordered on irrational. "You've worked hard, you've survived more than most people could ever handle, and yet you've completely shut yourself off. This is just a chance. One dinner. No pressure." Miranda had initially resisted. The thought of sitting across from a stranger, of navigating the nuances of attraction, conversation, and expectation while confined to a wheelchair, was overwhelming. She imagined the awkward silences, the pitying glances, the inevitable disappointment. But after days of Colleen's relentless persuasion, coupled with a growing curiosity about what life might still hold, she had agreed. Not because she believed in the promise of romance, but because she was, in some small way, ready to reclaim a piece of herself that had been lost. The evening of the date arrived, and Miranda found herself in a restaurant she had never visited before. It was elegant without being pretentious, dimly lit with the soft glow of candles that flickered against exposed brick walls. The scent of fresh bread and roasted herbs mingled with the subtle aroma of expensive wine, creating an atmosphere both comforting and intimidating. She wheeled herself to the table Colleen had reserved, her movements precise and practiced, yet carrying a tension born of anticipation. As she waited, she observed the other patrons. Couples laughed over shared plates, their hands brushing occasionally in quiet intimacy. A group of friends celebrated a birthday, their voices rising and falling in a cadence of joy she could barely remember feeling. And all the while, she felt the familiar pang of isolation, the ghostly reminder that she had been removed from this world in ways she could not control. When her date arrived, she recognized him immediately from the photo Colleen had sent. Tall, impeccably dressed, with a smile that seemed rehearsed for charm rather than sincerity. He greeted her with a handshake that lingered just long enough to feel obligatory, and she felt the tension in her shoulders tighten. Conversation started with the usual small talk, the weather, work, mutual acquaintances. It was polite, it was safe, and it was painfully predictable. Miranda found herself scanning the restaurant for an escape route, wondering if she had made a mistake in agreeing to this evening at all, and then, just as the first course arrived, the door opened. A man stepped inside who seemed completely out of place. His clothes were stained with grease, boots scuffed and worn, hands roughened by labor. He carried a toolbox, not a gift or an accessory, and his hair was tousled as if he had just rolled out of the garage. For a moment, Miranda's eyes widened, and the world seemed to hold its breath. There was something about him that was utterly genuine, utterly unpolished, utterly alive. He paused, scanning the room as if he were searching for someone, or perhaps nothing at all. When his gaze landed on Miranda, he smiled, a bright, disarming smile that made her forget, for the first time in months, the carefully constructed barriers around her heart. He walked over to the table, unsure yet confident, and asked, almost sheepishly, is this table for the blind date? Her date, the polished lawyer, froze. The humor of the situation, this mechanic, intruding in a place of refinement, was not lost on Miranda. And yet, she felt a strange pull of curiosity. Who was this man? What did he want? Why did the sight of him make her pulse quicken in a way it hadn't in years? As he approached, Miranda realized that she hadn't smiled in a long time. Not a real smile, not the kind that reached her eyes and lingered on her lips, not the kind that made her feel like herself again. Something about this unexpected intrusion, this raw, untamed presence, had sparked a flicker of something she thought she had lost forever: anticipation, excitement, and perhaps even hope. She straightened in her wheelchair, her fingers brushing lightly against the polished wood of the table, as she prepared herself for what could only be described as the most unpredictable evening of her life. The accident, the paralysis, the years of solitude, all of it had led to this singular moment. She didn't know what would happen next, or how this mechanic had managed to shake the foundations of her carefully controlled world, but for the first time in a long while, she felt alive, and as he sat down, the conversation began, not the practiced pleasantries of her date, not the rehearsed charm of someone who sought approval, but something different. Something real. Something that had the potential to change everything. The moment Sam, the mechanic, settled into the chair across from Miranda, the restaurant seemed to shift in ways she couldn't quite explain. There was an energy about him that made the polished elegance of the place feel almost absurd. His jumpsuit was streaked with grease, the sleeves rolled up to reveal strong, work-worn forearms, and a faint scent of oil and sweat followed him like a shadow. But it wasn't unpleasant, it was real. Unlike the carefully rehearsed charm of her original date, this man seemed untethered by societal expectation, unbothered by appearances, and entirely present in the moment. Miranda blinked, uncertain whether to be annoyed or intrigued. Her date, James, the suave lawyer who had seemed so confident just moments before, now looked like he had lost his footing. He coughed nervously, glanced at her, and then back at Sam, unsure what to say. James's tailored suit and polished demeanor suddenly felt hollow, meaningless in comparison to Sam's raw authenticity. "I'm Sam," the man said simply, giving a small shrug as though nothing were amiss. "You called me?" Miranda's eyebrows arched. No. "I think there's been some mistake," she said, her voice tight with a mixture of irritation and curiosity. Sam chuckled, a deep, easy sound that seemed to reverberate through the space between them. "Guess I read the room wrong. Or maybe I didn't. I'm not really sure." Despite the absurdity of the situation, Miranda felt a flicker of amusement. It had been years since anyone had made her laugh spontaneously, without agenda or expectation. There was something refreshingly human about Sam's presence, unpolished, unpretentious, and utterly unexpected. James, clearly rattled, attempted to regain control. "I believe this is my date," he said, his tone clipped, as if the mere presence of Sam had threatened to unravel the entire evening. Sam tilted his head slightly, smiling again. "Well, I didn't come here to fight anyone," he said. "I was told someone might need a little company." Miranda's lips twitched in the beginnings of a smile. She wasn't sure why she found herself drawn to this man, who had clearly barged into her carefully orchestrated evening with all the subtlety of a thunderstorm. But there was something in the way he looked at her, not with pity, not with curiosity alone, but with genuine interest, that made her pulse quicken in a way it hadn't in years. "I'm Miranda," she said finally, her voice steadier now. "And I'm guessing you're not my date." "Nope," he said, grinning. "Definitely not. But maybe I should be. I've been told I have a talent for chaos, and it seems like your night could use a little of that." She laughed, a short, surprised burst that startled even her. It felt foreign on her lips, like discovering an old, forgotten instrument in the attic of her soul. Her date, James, cleared his throat and looked for support from the waiter, who was trying not to look involved. Sam, oblivious to the tension he had caused, leaned back and looked around the table. "So," he said casually, "what's your story?" "I don't mean the boring version. I mean the real one." Miranda froze slightly. The real one. It had been years since she had shared her true self with anyone outside her office walls. Most people she encountered either wanted her professional facade or were too uncomfortable to confront the reality of her accident. She had grown skilled at filtering, at giving just enough information to maintain polite conversation without revealing too much vulnerability, but there was something about Sam that made her reconsider. Maybe it was his raw honesty, the way he didn't flinch at her wheelchair or the subtle cues of her paralysis. Maybe it was the fact that he hadn't asked her if she wanted pity or sympathy, but instead had asked the only question that mattered: "Who are you really?" Miranda inhaled deeply, deciding to test this unexpected stranger. "I used to run a company," she began, her voice gaining strength with each word. "A startup I built from scratch. It grew bigger than I ever imagined, and I spent years pouring myself into it, sacrificing almost everything else in my life. And then, this." She gestured briefly to her wheelchair, the motion small but filled with significance. One accident, and suddenly everything changed. Sam didn't flinch. He didn't avert his eyes, didn't mutter a polite, "I'm sorry." He simply nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Sounds like you've been through a lot," he said quietly. "But it also sounds like you didn't give up." Miranda felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. He hadn't said, "Poor you," or "That's tragic." He had acknowledged her struggle without reducing her to it. She studied him carefully, his face was open, his eyes bright, and there was a lightness to his presence that was disarming. He wasn't polished, he wasn't pretending, and somehow that made him magnetic. Their conversation began to flow naturally, something Miranda hadn't expected in a restaurant filled with strangers. She told him about the accident, the long nights in the hospital, the frustration of learning to navigate a world not designed for someone like her. Sam listened intently, nodding occasionally, asking questions that were simple but meaningful. He asked about her hobbies, her favorite foods, the books she loved, the music that moved her. He even teased her lightly when she revealed her guilty pleasure for cheesy romantic comedies, and the more she spoke, the more she realized how much she had missed genuine human connection. Not the polite, superficial interactions she had grown accustomed to, but real dialogue with someone who was present, curious, and unafraid of her reality. For the first time in years, Miranda felt seen, not as a CEO, not as a survivor, not as a woman confined to a wheelchair, but simply as herself. At one point, Sam leaned across the table, his hand brushing hers by accident. Miranda felt a jolt of electricity, a physical reminder that life could still surprise her in ways she had thought impossible. She pulled her hand back slightly, startled by her own reaction, and Sam chuckled. "Sorry," he said, but there was no awkwardness in his tone. "I guess I just like being close to people when I talk to them." "Makes sense, right?" Miranda nodded, feeling a blush creep up her cheeks. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced in years, and it was both thrilling and terrifying. The tension in her shoulders began to ease, replaced by a tentative excitement she hadn't allowed herself to feel since before the accident. Meanwhile, James, the original date, had slunk further into his seat, clearly unsure how to respond. The polished lawyer, with his rehearsed charm and carefully measured words, seemed suddenly irrelevant. Sam's presence had upended the evening entirely, and Miranda realized she didn't care. She didn't care about appearances, about social expectations, about what anyone else in the restaurant might think. All that mattered was the connection she was experiencing in that moment, raw and unfiltered. As the waiter brought their main courses, Sam's attention never wavered. He asked about her preferences, shared anecdotes from his own life, stories from the garage, from fixing cars, from moments of unexpected humor and human error, and all the while, he laughed with a warmth that was contagious. Miranda found herself joining in, her laughter gaining volume and confidence with each passing minute. It wasn't just the humor that captivated her. It was the way Sam made her feel normal again. He didn't treat her differently because of her wheelchair. He didn't avoid physical topics or her vulnerabilities. He didn't offer empty reassurances or platitudes. He simply engaged with her, fully and without pretense, and in doing so, reminded her that life could still contain moments of joy, spontaneity, and genuine connection. By the time dessert arrived, the initial chaos of Sam's entrance had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Miranda and Sam were no longer strangers. They were two people sharing a space, a conversation, a series of small, meaningful moments that seemed to erase the years of loneliness and isolation that had defined her life since the accident. Miranda caught herself smiling again, a real, unguarded smile. She hadn't realized how long it had been since her lips had curved in genuine amusement, since her eyes had sparkled with delight rather than fatigue. And when Sam laughed, his eyes crinkling with authenticity, she felt a connection that went beyond physical attraction or curiosity. It was a reminder of the humanity she had feared she had lost, a flicker of hope that life could still surprise her in profound ways. The night wore on, and the restaurant began to empty, the soft music and candlelight creating a cocoon around their small table. Miranda realized that she hadn't once thought about her accident in a way that brought her despair. Instead, she had felt seen, heard, and valued. Sam's presence had shifted something inside her, challenging her assumptions about what life after the accident could look like, and opening a door she hadn't dared to approach in years. Finally, as they prepared to leave, Sam offered to help her navigate the restaurant's steps and curb. There was no awkwardness, no overbearing assistance, just a steady, supportive presence that reminded her that she didn't have to face the world entirely alone. "Thanks for tonight," Miranda said softly, her heart still racing with an emotion she struggled to name. "I didn't expect this at all." Sam smiled, tilting his head in that disarming way.